Lisa Jenkins stood in the corner of the upscale Chicago restaurant, wiping down a table as the evening rush flowed around her. The faint clink of glasses, the hum of voices, and the sizzle from the kitchen were all too familiar, yet tonight felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. It wasn't just the usual bustle of busy diners or the overbearing manager hovering by the kitchen door, making sure everything was running smoothly. Tonight, something, or rather, someone, would walk through the door that would turn everything upside down. Michael Jordan, the legendary basketball icon, had made a surprise reservation at the restaurant. Lisa was used to seeing celebrities in the restaurant. They came and went, slipping in and out unnoticed by most. But tonight was different. Jordan wasn't just any celebrity, he was a basketball legend, a global icon. The whispers of his arrival had already rippled through the kitchen and dining room like wildfire. She could feel the energy shift as the staff, eager for the chance to serve him, hurried to prepare the best table in the house. She wasn't nervous, not at first. Lisa had spent years as a waitress in high-end restaurants. She knew how to navigate a room full of demanding patrons, juggle orders, and keep her cool. But Michael Jordan, well, this was different. She had watched him dominate the court, mesmerized by his athleticism and grace. He was, for lack of a better word, a god in her eyes. She couldn't help but wonder how he would act in person. Would he be as flawless as his persona, or would the pressure of fame leave him with a chip on his shoulder? The door opened, and there he was. Tall, effortlessly confident, dressed in a dark leather jacket, looking just as imposing as he did on the court, yet exuding an undeniable aura of cool. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any dinner shift. Tonight, she was going to serve Michael Jordan. She took a deep breath and walked over to his table, offering him a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Jordan. Welcome to, restaurant name. May I take your order?" For a brief moment, their eyes locked. He gave her a slight nod and a small smile in return. "Thank you. I'll have the special tonight, please." Lisa wrote down the order, trying to keep her cool. But inside, her thoughts were racing. Was this the moment her life changed? Or would it be just another night, serving another rich customer who would forget her face the moment they left? As she turned to leave, a voice from across the room caught her attention. It was her manager, Alan, gesturing for her to come over. She excused herself from the table and made her way over, trying to shake the nerves that had begun to creep in. "What's going on?" Lisa asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Alan's face was serious, his eyes darting toward the table where Michael Jordan was sitting. "You need to be on your best behavior tonight. This isn't just another customer. You can't mess this up. We want him coming back, and that means giving him the best service possible." Lisa nodded, already knowing that much. Alan was always obsessive about perfection, especially when it came to celebrities. But there was something about the way he said it tonight that rubbed her the wrong way. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't dwell on it. Her job was to serve, and that's exactly what she would do. The night went on, and as the hours passed, Michael Jordan seemed to be enjoying his meal. He was polite, even joking with the staff in between bites of his steak. The evening was flowing smoothly. Lisa went about her tasks, making sure everything was perfect for him. But deep down, she felt a tug of something, a sense of connection, perhaps, when she looked over at him. They exchanged glances a few times, and each time, he smiled in a way that made her feel like she mattered, even if only for that fleeting moment. But then, something strange happened. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted, and Lisa wasn't sure what had caused it. A ripple of tension seemed to spread among the staff, starting with Alan and then moving through the waiters and the kitchen staff. It was subtle, but Lisa noticed it immediately. The excitement had morphed into something more, competitive. She approached Michael's table one more time to check in on him, offering a warm smile and making small talk about the food. Before she could ask if he needed anything else, Alan appeared, standing just behind her. His eyes were hard, his jaw clenched. He cleared his throat and looked pointedly at Lisa. "Excuse me, Ms. Jenkins," Alan said, his voice cold and stern. "I need to speak with you. Now." Lisa was caught off guard. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had done everything by the book, made sure Michael Jordan was well taken care of. Alan's tone was sharp, and it immediately made her stomach churn. Without another word, Lisa excused herself from the table and followed Alan to the back office. Her mind raced as she tried to anticipate what had gone wrong. Was there a complaint? Had she done something to upset the guest? But nothing could have prepared her for what Alan said next. "Lisa, you're fired," he snapped, his words echoing in the small office. "You can't behave like this, acting all buddy-buddy with the guests. This is a business, and you've crossed a line." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Fired? For what? Helping Michael Jordan? Alan didn't give her a chance to respond. "You're lucky we're letting you leave quietly. Clean up your stuff and go." Lisa stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her felt like it was spinning out of control. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. Had this really just happened? She glanced over her shoulder, catching one last glimpse of Michael Jordan at his table, completely unaware of the storm brewing just behind the scenes. Her hands shook as she grabbed her belongings and left the office, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. As Lisa walked out of the restaurant for the last time, she couldn't help but wonder, why? Why had she been fired for something so simple, so human, as helping someone who was in need? Her heart heavy, she stepped out into the cold Chicago night, her world suddenly turned upside down. And little did she know, this moment, the one that seemed like the end, was actually just the beginning. What happened next would shock everyone, including Lisa herself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lisa Jenkins had always been a survivor. She didn't come from money, nor did she have the kind of privilege that many people around her seemed to take for granted. She had grown up in the gritty, vibrant streets of Chicago, where you learn early on that life didn't hand you anything. If you wanted something, you had to fight for it. Born to a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, Lisa learned the value of hard work and determination. Her mother, Mary Jenkins, was a fierce woman with a heart as big as the world, but she didn't have time to coddle Lisa. She believed in teaching her daughter how to stand on her own 2 feet, to be independent, strong, and unyielding. From an early age, Lisa had seen her mother struggle, but she also saw how her mother never gave up. Lisa's father, a man she barely remembered, had left when she was just a baby. Her mother never spoke of him, and the few times Lisa asked, the conversation would be brushed aside with a faint sigh. There was always an unspoken pain that Lisa could feel, but she never truly understood it. All she knew was that Mary had raised her alone, doing everything she could to give Lisa the life she deserved. School had never been easy for Lisa. She wasn't the smartest in class, and sometimes she felt invisible among her peers. But she always had a way of connecting with people. It wasn't through books or grades, it was through the stories she shared, the way she made people laugh, and the deep empathy she held for others. Her first job had come at the age of 16, when she started working as a waitress at a small diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a way to help her mother with the bills. Over the next few years, Lisa worked her way up, from that greasy diner to fancier restaurants, learning the ropes of the service industry. She became good at what she did, so good, in fact, that by the time she was 23, she was working at one of the most prestigious fine dining establishments in the city. It was a far cry from the neighborhood she had grown up in, and it seemed like she had finally made it. Or at least, that's what she thought. Lisa wasn't naive, though. She had been working in the restaurant industry long enough to know that things weren't always as they seemed. There were customers who saw her as just another face behind the counter, another nameless person in a sea of waitstaff. She had learned to keep her distance emotionally, not letting the rude or condescending remarks get to her. But there were also those rare moments, like tonight, when she felt like she was actually making a connection with someone. That was how it had been with Michael Jordan, though she hadn't fully realized it yet. When he walked into the restaurant, something in the air had shifted for her. Maybe it was the fact that she had admired him from afar for so long, or maybe it was the unexpected kindness he had shown her. While most celebrities treated waitstaff as invisible, Michael had treated her like she was someone worth speaking to. That smile, that brief exchange, it had meant something to Lisa. But then came the firing. It felt like a slap in the face, a betrayal of everything she had worked for. She had spent years earning her place in this restaurant, building relationships with the regular customers, and honing her craft. Yet all of that seemed to mean nothing in the face of Alan's cold dismissal. What made it even worse was the way it happened. One minute, Lisa was doing her job, serving a table, chatting with Michael Jordan like a professional, and the next, she was being told to pack up her things and leave without explanation. She couldn't help but feel that the entire situation was unfair. She had been nothing but polite and professional. She had gone out of her way to make sure the guests were happy, including Michael. Yet, the reason she had been fired was still unclear. What had gone wrong? Her mind kept racing back to the events leading up to her dismissal. Alan, her manager, had always been a bit of a stickler for rules, but this was different. The tension between them had been palpable all evening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was just looking for a reason to get rid of her. Perhaps it was her proximity to Michael Jordan that bothered him. Maybe he saw it as a threat to his own authority, or perhaps he just didn't like seeing Lisa, someone he saw as beneath him, getting too close to a celebrity. But that still didn't explain the sudden outburst, the way Alan had looked at her with such disdain. It wasn't just about the service. There was something more to it, something deeper that Lisa couldn't quite put her finger on. As she walked through the streets of Chicago that night, a cold wind biting at her skin, she couldn't help but think about her mother. Mary had always said, when life knocks you down, you get up and fight. You keep moving, no matter what. But right now, Lisa didn't know what to fight for. She felt lost. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it seemed like everything had crumbled in an instant. In the midst of her confusion, a thought kept running through her mind: is this really the end? Or is this just the beginning of something bigger? Lisa didn't have the answers. But what she did know was this: she wasn't going to let one setback define her. She had come too far for that. As the lights of the city twinkled in the distance, she took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever was waiting for her next, she was going to face it head-on. And if she had to prove something, anything, she would do it. Lisa was a fighter, and she wasn't about to give up now. But the real question that lingered was, what would she do next? Lisa had no idea. But soon, she would find out. The days that followed Lisa's sudden dismissal felt like a blur, each one blending into the next. She couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. What should have been a moment of clarity after a terrible experience turned into a period of confusion and turmoil. Chicago was a city that never slept, but Lisa had found herself wide awake in the middle of a storm, emotionally, financially, and mentally. She had never felt more lost. She spent her first day after being fired in a haze, pacing around her small apartment in Logan Square. The sound of her shoes tapping on the wooden floors echoed in the otherwise silent room. Every time she tried to think about her next move, she was interrupted by a flood of conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, and even doubt. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and for a moment, Lisa didn't want to look at it. It was probably another collection agency or a well-meaning friend asking how she was doing. But when she saw her mother's name flashing across the screen, Lisa immediately grabbed it. She needed to hear Mary's voice. "Mom," Lisa said, her voice cracking as she answered the phone. "Sweetheart, you okay?" Mary's voice was calm, the kind of steady reassurance that had always grounded Lisa. "I've been calling you all morning. What happened?" I got fired," Lisa replied, unable to keep the emotion from seeping through her words. "I don't understand it, Mom. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to be professional. But Alan, he just fired me. And I don't know why." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Mary spoke again, this time with a soft sigh. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. You've worked so hard to get to where you are. But this isn't the end of the road, okay? You know that. You're smart, and you're strong. You'll find another way." "But it's not that simple, Mom," Lisa countered, frustration lacing her words. "I don't have another job lined up, and bills are piling up. I don't even know where to start looking. And what if I never get another chance like this again? What if that was it?" Her mother's voice softened, and there was a hint of sadness in it. "I know you're scared, baby. But sometimes, life knocks us down when we least expect it. But you have the strength to rise again. Don't give up. We're a family. We'll get through this together. You just have to keep moving forward." Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know how to move forward from here. It feels like everything's falling apart. I know it seems like that now, but trust me, Lisa. You're not alone in this. And sometimes the hardest moments in life lead us to exactly where we're supposed to be. Maybe this is a sign, baby. Maybe it's time to make a change." Those words hit Lisa harder than she expected. "A change," she muttered to herself, her mind beginning to swirl with possibilities. "Maybe it's time for something new. Maybe this is the push I needed. Just remember, you've always got me. And I'm proud of you. You don't have to do this alone." The call ended, but Lisa remained standing in the middle of her apartment, her mind still churning with her mother's words. A change. Could this be the beginning of something better? Or was she just clinging to a faint glimmer of hope? Later that evening, as Lisa scrolled through job listings, she found herself staring at an ad for a job at a new high-end restaurant opening up downtown. The salary was good, the perks were better, and the location was prime. It was everything Lisa could ever want in a job, but she hesitated. What if she got the job and then, just like before, her boss found some reason to dismiss her? What if the same thing happened again? But as her eyes lingered on the ad, she realized something: she was tired of living in fear. She was tired of letting the unknown hold her back. She was ready to take a leap of faith. So, she applied. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of anticipation. Lisa felt as though she was on the verge of something important, but the question of what that was still lingered. While the potential new job was promising, something nagged at the back of her mind. The abruptness of her firing from the restaurant, the way Alan had reacted, there had to be more to the story. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that there was a reason behind it, a deeper motivation at play. As she prepared for an interview at the new restaurant, she found herself back at the restaurant where it all went wrong. The restaurant she had once worked at, the place where she had served Michael Jordan. She hadn't planned on going back, she didn't think she had the strength, but something inside her urged her to do it. To face the place that had fired her. When she walked in, the familiar sounds of the kitchen filled her ears, but the atmosphere felt different. People were working quickly, but there was an underlying tension in the air. She saw Alan behind the counter, talking to a few of the waiters. His back was to her, but she could tell by the way his shoulders were tense that he was deep in conversation about something serious. Lisa couldn't resist. She walked up to the host stand, where a young woman named Sarah was seated, scanning the reservation list. "Hey, Sarah," Lisa greeted her, trying to keep her voice light. "Is Alan around?" Sarah looked up, startled, but quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, Lisa. Yeah, I think he's in the office." "What's going on?" "I need to talk to him," Lisa replied, her voice steady. "I've got some things I need to clear up." As Sarah made a quick gesture for Lisa to head to the back, she felt her heartbeat quicken. This wasn't just about getting answers anymore. This was about standing up for herself, reclaiming her dignity, and finding out why her entire world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. Lisa took a deep breath before walking toward Alan's office. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. And when she walked into that office, she realized something: this wasn't just about her firing. This was about something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. Lisa knocked gently on the door to Alan's office, her pulse racing. She didn't expect the warm welcome she had once received from her colleagues here. Things were different now. There was no going back. The uncertainty gnawed at her insides, but she steeled herself. She had to know why he had fired her. The door opened with a creak, and Alan, dressed in his usual crisp shirt and slacks, looked up from a stack of papers on his desk. His expression was neutral at first, but when his eyes landed on Lisa, it faltered slightly. He seemed surprised to see her. "Lisa," he said, his voice flat, as if he had anticipated this moment but didn't quite know how to handle it. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Lisa said firmly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "I need to understand why I was fired. I've been thinking about it, and it doesn't make sense." Alan hesitated, glancing at the papers on his desk before pushing them aside and leaning back in his chair. His eyes flickered with something: guilt? Regret? She couldn't quite tell. It wasn't like him to show any weakness, but in this moment, he seemed off balance. "I don't think there's much more to say," Alan replied, his voice now tinged with something Lisa couldn't quite place. "You didn't follow the rules. Simple as that." "Rules?" Lisa repeated, narrowing her eyes. "What rules?" "I've been following every rule in the book, Alan." "You can't be serious. This isn't about rules, is it?" "Something happened, something more than that." Alan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There was a long silence between them, and Lisa's heart started to beat faster. She could feel something big was coming, something that might finally explain the strange, cold dismissal. "I'm sorry, Lisa," Alan said finally, almost too quietly. "It wasn't personal." "It felt personal," she shot back, anger rising in her chest. "I don't know what you're trying to hide, but I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Alan's face hardened, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He seemed to be wrestling with something, as if deciding whether or not to tell her the truth. "It wasn't about you," Alan admitted reluctantly. "Not exactly. It was about Michael Jordan." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Michael Jordan? What does he have to do with me?" Alan sighed deeply, pushing his fingers through his hair in frustration. "Look, this whole thing has been complicated. He's not just any customer. Well, let's just say he's more than just a famous athlete. We've been getting pressure from corporate to handle him a certain way, especially when it comes to his security. When you served him that night, things got out of hand. And not just because of you." Lisa's mind was racing now. Pressure from corporate? What did that mean? "Wait, are you telling me I got fired because I helped him?" "Not exactly." Alan seemed to choose his words carefully. "But it's more than just helping him. The problem was that he paused, looking guilty, as though speaking the words pained him. "You made him feel too comfortable. Too at ease. And that wasn't part of the plan." Lisa was stunned. "You're saying it was my fault that he felt comfortable? Because I did my job." "Look," Alan continued, leaning forward in his chair, "it's not about that. You were great with him. But we have to treat people like Michael Jordan differently. You don't just serve him like any other guest. It's all about maintaining a certain level of control, especially when his security is involved. There are rules we can't break. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling. This was about control. About maintaining power over a man who, in her eyes, was just another guest. It didn't make sense. And yet, here it was. Her entire career hanging by a thread because of something completely out of her control. That's absurd, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. That's not how it should work. He's just a person, Alan. He's not a piece of property for you to control. Alan sighed again, clearly feeling the weight of the situation. I know, Lisa. I know. But you have to understand, it's not that simple. There are corporate interests at play here, big money, big politics. People like Michael Jordan don't just walk into a restaurant. We're under pressure to make sure everything goes perfectly, no matter what. Lisa was silent, digesting his words. It was all starting to make a terrible kind of sense. She hadn't been fired for a mistake. She had been fired for something much darker, something that had less to do with her actions and more to do with the hidden world of celebrity and the power dynamics that played out behind closed doors. She looked at Alan, the anger in her chest growing. So you're telling me that I did everything right, but because of some corporate nonsense and your need to control everything, I get the axe. That's the kind of world you're in. Alan didn't answer immediately, but his face seemed to darken with regret. He opened his mouth, as if to say something more, but then closed it, unsure of what to say next. Lisa stood there, stunned by the revelation. She had always known that working in the service industry meant dealing with difficult people and situations. But this? This was something she hadn't expected. The idea that her career, her livelihood, had been jeopardized by the whims of corporate greed and celebrity politics was almost too much to bear. You've got to be kidding me, Lisa said finally, her voice trembling with frustration. I've spent years building my career here, and this is how it ends. Because of corporate nonsense. Alan looked down at the desk, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Lisa. You were one of the best. I didn't want it to go down this way. For a moment, the room was silent. Lisa's anger was replaced by a hollow feeling, a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. She had trusted this place. She had trusted the people here. And yet, in the end, it was all just about power and control, nothing more, nothing less. But something inside her stirred. She had been betrayed. But that didn't mean she was done. If anything, it meant she was just getting started. I'm done here, Lisa said firmly, her voice cold. But you'll regret this. I'll find my own way, Alan. I'll make sure the truth comes out. She turned on her heel and walked out of the office, feeling a mix of relief and anger. But as she stepped out into the chilly night air, something else came to her mind. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The wind whipped around Lisa's face as she walked away from the restaurant, her mind spinning with a storm of emotions. She didn't even know where she was going, just walking for the sake of putting distance between herself and the world she had just walked away from. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and frustration. She had always believed in hard work, in playing by the rules, but now she knew the world wasn't as fair as she had hoped. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as she trudged down the sidewalk, hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets. The cold had begun to seep into her bones, but it wasn't just the weather that made her shiver. It was the crushing realization that she had been played. That she had spent years trying to climb the ladder in a world where the rules were rigged, where personal ambition didn't matter unless you were part of the right crowd. And Michael Jordan? He wasn't just a guest. He was a pawn in a larger game, a game that Lisa hadn't even known she was playing. She couldn't stop thinking about Alan's words, it's not about you. It's about Michael Jordan. It's about control. How many times had she been told that her hard work would lead her to success? But in the end, it hadn't. Instead, she had been tossed aside for a higher game. She was just collateral damage. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. Lisa pulled it out, seeing a message from her old friend, Rachel. "Hey, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Want to talk?" Lisa stared at the message, hesitating. Rachel had been her closest friend from the early days at the restaurant. They had worked side by side, laughing and venting together. She felt an immediate sense of relief just from seeing Rachel's name. At least someone cared. "I don't know what to say, Rachel. It doesn't make sense. Everything I worked for just, gone." Rachel replied almost instantly. "I know. It's so messed up. But you've got so much more to offer than that place. You'll find something better. Just don't give up." The words were kind, but Lisa couldn't help feeling bitter. It's not about finding something better. It's about finding something that doesn't make me feel like I'm just being used. Rachel's next message was different. "I get it. But I also know you, Lisa. You're strong, and you're not going to let this define you. You deserve so much more." Lisa wiped a tear from her cheek, though she hadn't realized it had fallen. She had to pull herself together. She couldn't let this break her. She had to keep moving forward, even if she didn't know where that path would lead. But as she walked through the darkening streets of Chicago, the city she had once loved and worked in with passion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking towards something far bigger than herself. It was no longer just about a job or a career. It was about her fight for justice, for dignity, and for the truth that had been kept from her. That night, Lisa sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she typed out a message to her mother, the woman who had always been her rock, her guiding light. "Mom, I'm so lost right now. I feel like everything's falling apart. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go next." Her mother's response came quickly, as always. "Sweetheart, sometimes when everything falls apart, it's because it's making room for something better. Trust in yourself. You've got this." Lisa smiled faintly, but it wasn't enough to chase away the doubt that lingered. She knew her mother was right. She had been through hard times before, and each time, she had come out stronger. But this time felt different. This time, she was up against something bigger than herself. She didn't just want her job back, she wanted to understand the forces at play, the reasons why she had been discarded. She had to find out who was behind it all, why it happened, and what kind of world she was truly living in. As the night dragged on, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Alan's words over and over in her head. It wasn't personal. That phrase echoed in her mind like a constant drumbeat. But everything about the situation screamed personal. The way he had looked at her, the way he had fired her without a second thought, the way her entire future had been tossed aside, it was personal. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the restaurant's website. Curious, she opened it, only to find an article about the restaurant's newest changes, new high-profile customers, new events, and a glowing write-up about the VIP treatment given to celebrities like Michael Jordan. It all seemed too polished, too rehearsed. But there was something else. There, at the bottom of the article, was a photo of Alan shaking hands with a man in a tailored suit. The caption read, "Alan Hargrove, restaurant manager, signs partnership agreement with corporate sponsors." Lisa's eyes widened as the realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just about Michael Jordan. This was about corporate deals, sponsorships, and exclusivity. Alan and the restaurant weren't just protecting their image, they were building an empire, using people like her to make that happen. Lisa had been nothing but a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. Her mind raced. If she was going to make it out of this, she needed to understand the full scope of the situation. She needed to find the people behind the scenes, the ones pulling the strings, the ones who had orchestrated her firing. She wasn't going to let them win. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. There was only one person who might have the information she needed, the person she had served the night everything changed. The man who had unknowingly set off the chain of events that had ruined her life. Michael Jordan. Lisa stared at the phone screen, feeling the weight of her decision. Reaching out to him wasn't just a crazy idea, it was her only chance to get the answers she needed. She needed to know if he was just as much a victim in this game as she was. With shaky hands, she typed a message, the words coming more easily than she expected. Mr. Jordan, I know this may seem strange, but I need to ask you something. There's more going on than you realize, and I think you're the only one who can help me uncover the truth. Please, if you can, get in touch. Lisa. Lisa hit send before she could second-guess herself. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was done waiting for the world to make decisions for her. She was going to take control. The storm wasn't over yet, but at least now, Lisa had a direction. Lisa's phone sat in her lap, the screen dimming as she stared at it, waiting. It felt as though the minutes stretched into hours. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart skipped a beat, and she grabbed it eagerly, only to be met with the usual barrage of spam messages and notifications from social media. Nothing from Michael Jordan. Nothing from anyone who could explain why her life had unraveled so quickly. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the couch, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her fingers drummed nervously on the phone screen, still gripped with uncertainty. Was she crazy for reaching out to him? Was there even a chance he would respond to someone like her? Her mind fought with itself, doubt tugging at her, yet she couldn't ignore the feeling that this was her last shot at uncovering the truth. Then, as though answering her unspoken thoughts, her phone buzzed again. Her heart leapt into her throat. She picked it up, almost dropping it in her haste to check the notification. This time, it wasn't spam or an email. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. Lisa, I received your message. I don't know everything you're talking about, but I'd like to help. Meet me at the Grove at 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll explain what I know. It was Michael Jordan's name at the top of the message. She blinked, almost not believing what she was seeing. Her mind reeled, 1,000 thoughts competing for attention. The famous basketball legend, the man she had unknowingly helped in the restaurant, was reaching out to her, offering to help her uncover the truth. It didn't make sense, but it was happening. The shock hit her first, followed by a rush of disbelief. She had sent the message in desperation, unsure of what she expected, if anything at all. But now, here it was, the opportunity she had been hoping for. She had been waiting for a chance to understand what had gone wrong, why her world had come crashing down, and Michael Jordan, of all people, was offering it. She typed back quickly, trying to steady her nerves. Thank you. I'll be there. The next day, Lisa found herself standing outside the Grove, a popular upscale restaurant and lounge, watching the steady flow of luxury cars pulling up to the valet. The place was elegant, the kind of venue she had only dreamed of working at before the restaurant incident. She was early, perhaps too early, but there was something about the sheer wealth and power of the place that made her feel out of place, like a small fish in a vast ocean. But this wasn't about the fancy setting. This was about finding answers. Michael Jordan had offered to meet her. And she couldn't afford to back out now. At exactly 2 p.m., a black SUV rolled up to the curb. Lisa's stomach fluttered as the driver opened the door, and out stepped the man she had only seen on television, on magazine covers, and in the headlines. Michael Jordan, with his unmistakable presence, walked toward her. He was as calm and collected as the basketball star she had always seen, but there was a certain softness in his expression now, a warmth that put her at ease. Lisa? He said, his voice smooth and calm, but with a hint of curiosity. Mr. Jordan, she replied, trying to control the sudden rush of nervousness that hit her. Thank you for meeting with me. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Please, just call me Michael. And don't worry about it. I've been keeping up with what's been going on, and I think we have a lot to talk about. They walked together toward a private seating area, away from the noise of the main restaurant. As they sat down, Michael glanced around to make sure they wouldn't be interrupted. Lisa noticed how natural he seemed, nothing like the media persona that always seemed larger than life. He was just a man, sitting across from her, offering answers to a problem she hadn't known how to solve. First off, I want to say I'm sorry for what happened to you, Michael began, his tone serious. You didn't deserve to lose your job, and it's messed up that things went down the way they did. Lisa nodded, not sure what to say. Her heart pounded, but she was trying to stay focused on the bigger picture. I don't understand. I helped you. Why would they fire me? Michael leaned back in his chair, sighing. It's complicated. You've been caught in a bigger situation than you realize. This restaurant, it's been in the middle of a lot of corporate deals and sponsorships. I didn't know this was happening, but I was one of the people they were using to push their agenda. Lisa's eyes widened. Corporate deals? What do you mean? Look, I don't want to put everything out there, but I've learned a lot in the past few days, Michael said, his expression shifting slightly, a touch of frustration entering his voice. There are people who don't care about the employees at places like this. It's all about the bigger picture, contracts, sponsorships, partnerships. When I walked into that restaurant, they saw an opportunity. And when you made me feel comfortable, when you treated me like a regular guest instead of a VIP, that went against everything they were trying to build. You didn't know it, but your kindness threw a wrench in their plans. Lisa sat in stunned silence, trying to process his words. It was all starting to make sense, the pieces falling into place. The restaurant hadn't been interested in customers, they had been interested in the money, the power, the exclusivity. And she had been caught in the middle of it, unknowingly disrupting a carefully orchestrated game. Michael, why would you even want to help me? Lisa asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. I mean, you didn't know me. You could have just walked away. Michael looked at her with a soft smile. I know how it feels to be used. To be treated as just a commodity, like you don't matter. You deserve better than that. And I want to help you get the truth out there. People need to know what's really going on behind the scenes. You're not the only one who's been hurt by this. His words hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the larger system, the hidden forces that dictated the lives of the workers, the ones who were being used without even realizing it. Thank you, Lisa whispered, a lump forming in her throat. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Michael said, his voice firm but kind. Now let's figure out how to make this right. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, Lisa felt a sense of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. And with Michael's help, maybe, just maybe, she could find the justice she deserved. The following days were a blur. Lisa barely slept, consumed by the whirlwind of emotions and questions swirling around her. Michael Jordan's offer of help had given her the push she needed, but the path ahead was still unclear. She couldn't simply stand by and wait for things to work themselves out. She had to act. She and Michael met several more times over the next week, huddling in quiet corners of cafes or empty boardrooms, exchanging information and piecing together a plan. Michael had made it clear, this wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about exposing a system that preyed on vulnerable workers, a system that was built on manipulation, power, and money. He had seen it before in the business world, and now he was seeing it again. The restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a cog in a much larger machine. I didn't realize how deep this went, Lisa said one afternoon as she sat with Michael at a small table in a downtown cafe. I thought it was just about one bad manager, one corrupt person. But now I see that this is something bigger. Much bigger. Michael nodded gravely. It's about control. Alan and others like him are just doing their part to make sure the system stays intact. The restaurant's not just a place to eat, it's a tool, a means to an end. They're working with people I don't trust, big-name investors who don't care about anything except the bottom line. You're not the first person they've crushed to get ahead. Lisa's stomach twisted at the thought of all the people who had been hurt in this system, people who didn't have the luxury of reaching out for help like she had. How do we stop it? How do we bring it all down? Michael took a long sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. We need to go after the people who are pulling the strings. We need to make sure the public knows the truth about what's been happening behind closed doors. It's going to take more than just us, this has to be a movement, something bigger. Lisa felt a wave of unease wash over her. The idea of fighting something so big, so powerful, was daunting. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't just let it go. She had already lost everything once, she couldn't allow herself to be silent any longer. What exactly are we going to do? She asked, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Michael leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. We're going to dig deeper. We're going to find out exactly who's behind all of this and expose them. We're going to make sure that people like Alan Hargrove understand that they can't just destroy lives for profit. We start by gathering evidence, documents, records, anything that proves what's been going on behind the scenes. And we're going to leak it to the press. Lisa swallowed hard. She had never been part of something like this before. The stakes felt higher than anything she had ever experienced. What if they find out? What if they come after us? Michael's gaze was intense, but there was a calmness to his voice that grounded her. We'll be careful. We won't make any moves until we're ready. But trust me, Lisa. If we don't do something now, it will only get worse for others. We're doing this for everyone who has been taken advantage of, for everyone who's been overlooked and discarded by people like Alan. Lisa's heart beat faster as the weight of his words sank in. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. It was about justice for every worker, every person who had been treated like they didn't matter. She could no longer sit by and watch this happen. She had to act. We can't back down now, she said, determination rising within her. Let's do this. Over the next few days, Lisa and Michael worked tirelessly. They pieced together records, interviewed former employees, and began to understand just how deep the corruption ran. The restaurant wasn't just a victim of a corrupt manager, it was a player in a network of shady deals, manipulated events, and corporate greed. But it wasn't just about the restaurant. Lisa uncovered something far darker, connections between high-profile investors and organized crime groups. It was far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. They weren't just manipulating the restaurant's business model. They were laundering money, using their connections to put money into illegal ventures that had nothing to do with food or hospitality. As the pieces came together, Lisa's mind raced. They had to expose this, but they needed to be smart. They needed to make sure they had everything in order before going public. It wasn't just about ruining the people involved, it was about stopping a massive operation from causing further harm to innocent people. Then came a phone call that Lisa would never forget. It was from Rachel, her old friend from the restaurant. Lisa, Rachel's voice trembled on the other end of the line. I need to talk to you. Something's happened. I think I'm in danger. Lisa's heart dropped. What do you mean? What's going on? Rachel sounded frantic. I found something, documents, files, proof of everything. But now, I think they know I have it. They're watching me, Lisa. I don't know who to trust. Lisa felt her pulse race. She knew they were getting close, but this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Rachel, too. Where are you? We need to get you somewhere safe. I don't know. I'm scared. Listen to me, Rachel. I'll come to you. Just hang tight, okay? I'm not letting anything happen to you. We'll figure this out together. Lisa ended the call, a feeling of dread settling in her chest. This had just become far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The people they were up against weren't just ruthless, they were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. Michael met her shortly afterward, and Lisa relayed the conversation. "We need to move fast," he said, his tone serious. "They're getting desperate. We're not just up against a corrupt manager anymore. We're up against a full-fledged criminal operation." Lisa nodded, her mind racing. She didn't know how far this would go, or how deep the conspiracy ran. But she knew one thing for sure, she was in this fight now, no turning back. There was no escaping what was coming next. But she was ready. The tension in the air was palpable. Lisa paced back and forth in her small apartment, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The discovery of Rachel's information had been the final piece of the puzzle, but now the stakes were higher than ever. With Rachel in danger and the people they were up against growing increasingly desperate, Lisa knew they had no choice but to push forward. Michael had been right. The operation they were dealing with wasn't just about shady business practices, it was about power, control, and ruthless tactics. As Lisa tried to wrap her head around it all, the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. They weren't just trying to bring down a corrupt restaurant, they were trying to expose an entire network of criminal activity. The restaurant was only the surface. They had to move quickly. Rachel was now caught in the middle, and if she had information, it was only a matter of time before the people who were involved would realize she was a threat. That was why Lisa and Michael had decided to meet in person again, to discuss their next move. They couldn't afford to be careless. "I've been thinking about the next step," Michael said, his voice low and intense as he sat across from Lisa at a small cafe downtown. The place was mostly empty, the quiet hum of the early afternoon setting the perfect backdrop for their conversation. "We need to get the documents Rachel found into the right hands, someone trustworthy, someone who can help us." Lisa glanced around the cafe, as if expecting someone to overhear them. The sense of paranoia had begun to creep into her thoughts more and more lately. It wasn't just about the people at the restaurant anymore, the deeper they dug, the more dangerous this became. She could feel the walls closing in around her. "Who can we trust?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "It feels like everyone has their own agenda. How do we know who's really on our side?" Michael's eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer. "I've been in this game long enough to know when to trust someone. The person we need is someone who's been working in this field for a long time, someone who understands the stakes. Someone who has access to the right people and isn't afraid to go after the big players. I know just the person." Lisa hesitated, not sure if she was ready to take the leap. "And you trust them?" "I do. But this isn't going to be easy. We're going to have to be careful, and we're going to have to make sure we have all the facts in place before we move forward. If we get one thing wrong, everything could fall apart." Her pulse quickened as she thought about what was at stake. If they didn't do this right, if they made one wrong move, it could all be over. Rachel's safety, their lives, and everything they'd been working toward, it could all come crashing down. "I understand," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Let's do it. I'm ready." The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Michael's contact, a private investigator named Jake, had agreed to meet with them. Jake had been in the business for years, uncovering corporate corruption and exposing high-profile criminal operations. He was the kind of person Lisa never thought she'd meet, gruff, no nonsense, but with an air of authority that told her he had seen it all. When Lisa and Michael met Jake at a rundown bar in the outskirts of town, she immediately felt the weight of the situation. Jake didn't waste time on pleasantries. He cut straight to the point, asking for the documents Rachel had found. "I don't care how you got them," Jake said, his voice gravelly. "But I need them. Now." Lisa handed over the envelope with the files, her hands trembling slightly. She had never felt more vulnerable in her life, as though she was handing over the key to her future. Everything they had worked for rested in that envelope. Jake examined the documents quickly, his eyes flicking over the papers with practiced precision. "This is exactly what we need," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "But this isn't going to be as simple as leaking these to the press. We're talking about a network that's too big, too connected. If we go public with this too soon, we'll all be targets." Michael nodded. "We know. That's why we need your help. We need to know how to expose this without putting ourselves in immediate danger." Jake took a long drag from his cigarette, then leaned back in his chair. "First things first, there's no going back from this. If you want to take down people like this, you need to make sure you've got everything lined up. We'll go through these files, cross-check everything, and make sure we're not missing anything. And we need to get our story straight. The press isn't going to just buy this, we need to have all the proof we can get." Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just about getting her job back anymore, it was about taking down an entire network of corrupt individuals who had been pulling the strings for far too long. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night meetings, research, and constant back-and-forth. They sifted through more documents, more recordings, and more secrets than Lisa had ever imagined. With Jake's help, they uncovered more about the investors involved, the organized crime syndicates they were linked to, and the underhanded deals that had been happening for years. Every discovery brought them closer to the truth, but also deeper into danger. The more they learned, the more they realized just how high the stakes were. The people they were going up against had power and influence that stretched far beyond what Lisa could have imagined. These weren't just businessmen, these were people who could make people disappear. One night, as Lisa sat alone in her apartment, going over the files for the umpteenth time, she got an unexpected call. It was Rachel. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said, her voice shaky. "I think they know I have the files." "I'm scared, Lisa. They're watching me." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. "Where are you?" "I'll come to you." "I'm already gone. I couldn't risk it. But they're looking for me. I need to get out of town. Can you help me?" The weight of the situation pressed heavily on Lisa's chest. They were in it now, and there was no turning back. Rachel's life was in danger, and everything they had uncovered was about to explode into the open. "I'm coming," Lisa said, her voice calm despite the panic she felt inside. "We'll figure this out." As she hung up the phone, she knew that this was the moment that would change everything. They were about to go up against forces that could destroy them. But Lisa had come too far to back down now. The sound of Lisa's heart pounding in her ears was deafening as she quickly threw together a few essentials: clothes, her phone, and a spare charger. She had been through enough at this point to know that everything was changing, and fast. Rachel was on the run, and it was no longer just about protecting herself or exposing the truth, it was about survival. As Lisa grabbed her bag, she heard the screech of tires outside her window. Her breath caught in her throat, and she rushed to peek through the blinds. Two dark cars were parked across the street, the engines running. They weren't there for a simple chat. They were waiting for something, or someone. Her fingers fumbled as she grabbed her phone and dialed Michael's number. It rang once, twice, before he picked up. "Lisa, what's going on?" "I heard from Rachel. She's on the move." Michael's voice was tight, and she could feel the urgency in his words. "I'm going to meet her now," Lisa whispered urgently. "But I think they know where she is. There are two cars outside my place. I don't know how long we have before they find her." "Get out of there now," Michael said, his voice firm. "Go to the old diner we used to meet at. I'll be there in 10 minutes. We can't afford to let them catch Rachel." "I'll hurry," Lisa replied, hanging up quickly. She didn't waste another second, grabbing her keys and rushing out the door, every instinct screaming at her to be cautious. The last thing she wanted was to be followed. The streets outside were quiet, almost eerily so. It was the middle of the night, and the city was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Lisa's mind raced as she drove toward the diner. She couldn't stop thinking about Rachel, about how much danger she was in. The fear for her friend gnawed at her insides, but Lisa had learned to push her fear aside, at least for now. They didn't have the luxury of hesitation. They had to act. When Lisa pulled up to the diner, she was relieved to see Michael's car parked in front. He was already inside, waiting for her. She ran in quickly, scanning the empty parking lot before slipping inside through the door. Michael looked up as she entered, his expression a mixture of determination and concern. "We need to get to Rachel, fast. Do you have the address she gave you?" Lisa nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her bag. "She's in a motel on the outskirts of town. But she said she's not safe there anymore. I don't know where to go after that." Michael's jaw tightened. "We need to get her somewhere safe. I've got a contact who owes me a favor. We can get her out of here and somewhere secure." He stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. "We're running out of time." Lisa's pulse quickened as they left the diner and jumped into Michael's car. The night was dark, but her thoughts were consumed with the events that had led them here, the people who were after them, the lies, and the manipulation that had turned their lives upside down. They had always thought they were fighting for justice, but the closer they got to the truth, the more they realized how far-reaching the corruption was. They reached the motel in record time, the glow of neon signs casting long shadows in the parking lot. Lisa's gut churned with anxiety. Rachel had to be here, but where was she now? Was she safe? Or had they already caught up to her? As they pulled into the parking lot, Lisa's eyes scanned the area. She saw nothing unusual at first, no movement, no suspicious cars. But the knot in her stomach told her something was wrong. Michael pulled to a stop near the entrance, and they both got out of the car, moving quickly. Lisa's breath was shallow as she glanced around, trying to stay alert. When they reached the door to Rachel's room, Lisa's hand hovered over the handle, her mind racing. She knocked softly, the sound sharp in the quiet night. "Rachel?" Lisa called out, her voice wavering. "It's Lisa. It's safe to come out now." There was no answer. A chill ran down Lisa's spine as she exchanged a worried glance with Michael. "Rachel," she called again, louder this time. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Lisa's heart skipped a beat, but the face that appeared wasn't Rachel's. It was a man, tall, wearing dark sunglasses, and dressed in a black suit. He wasn't alone. Lisa's stomach dropped as she recognized the man standing beside him, Alan Hargrove. "Looking for something?" Alan's voice was smooth, almost taunting. The men stepped forward, blocking the door to the room. Lisa took a step back, a wave of panic rushing over her. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Alan smirked, clearly enjoying the power he had over the situation. "Rachel isn't here anymore. She decided to make herself scarce." Michael moved forward, standing protectively between Lisa and Alan. "What have you done with her?" Alan's expression darkened. "What's done is done. You should have known better than to get involved in things that don't concern you, Michael. And you, Lisa. Well, you're just a pawn in this game." The weight of his words hit Lisa like a slap to the face. Everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped to accomplish, had led her to this moment. It was clear now, there was no simple solution. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore, it was about survival. Alan took a step closer, his gaze cold. "This is your last warning. Walk away, or things are going to get a lot worse for you, and your friend Rachel." Lisa's heart raced. It was too much. The threat was real, and she could see the danger in Alan's eyes. But something inside her snapped. She had come this far. She couldn't back down now. Where is she? Lisa demanded again, her voice louder this time, steely with determination. Tell me where Rachel is. Now. The moment hung in the air like a powder keg about to explode. The silence in the motel room was suffocating. Lisa's breath hitched in her chest as she stood face to face with Alan Hargrove, the man whose web of corruption had ensnared everyone she cared about. His cold, calculating gaze never wavered as he took another step forward, asserting his dominance. Michael's body tensed beside her, the protective barrier between her and Alan like a wall of defiance. But even he knew the situation had escalated to a point where words alone wouldn't be enough to save them now. What have you done with Rachel? Lisa repeated, her voice strained but unyielding. She couldn't let fear take over, not now, not when they were this close to the end. She had come too far to back down, too much was on the line. Alan chuckled darkly, the sound sending a chill down her spine. You really think it's that simple, don't you? You think this is just about you, or Rachel, or your little vendetta against a few corrupt businessmen. You've stumbled into something much bigger than that. It's a game you can't win, Lisa. His words were calculated, meant to rattle her, and they hit their mark. But Lisa refused to let doubt creep into her mind. She had been fighting for too long to give up now. I'm not going to stop, Lisa declared, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing. And neither is Michael. You can try to intimidate us, but it's over. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not. Michael gave a slight nod, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Alan with a mix of fury and focus. If you think we're just going to walk away from this, you've severely underestimated us, he said, his tone unwavering. Alan's smile faltered for a moment as if he was trying to gauge just how serious they were. Then, with a calculated smirk, he spoke again, this time with more menace. You think you can expose me? You think anyone will believe you when it comes out that you're all just part of a bigger conspiracy? The power we hold goes beyond your little operation. Lisa felt the weight of his words, but she refused to let them break her resolve. She had seen how far the corruption reached, how many people were involved, and how much it had cost her. It was no longer just about the money, the restaurant, or even Rachel's safety. This had become something more. It was about making sure people like Alan Hargrove could never wield power over others again. You underestimate one thing, Alan, Lisa said, stepping forward despite the looming danger. People like you always think they have control. But the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks. People will listen. Alan's expression hardened, and for a moment, Lisa feared he might strike out. But then, unexpectedly, he stepped back, his face now betraying a hint of frustration. You're delusional, he spat. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Before Lisa could respond, a loud crashing sound came from the back of the motel. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of doors slamming open and hurried footsteps. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as her instincts screamed at her that Rachel might be nearby. Alan's face twisted into a snarl. What the hell are you? Suddenly, Rachel appeared at the door. She was panting, wide-eyed, and pale, but she was alive. Lisa. Michael. They're coming. They know we're here. Rachel gasped, her voice shaky but filled with desperation. They're not going to stop until they get everything they want. We have to go. Now. Without waiting for a response, she turned and bolted down the hallway, leaving a trail of anxiety and urgency in her wake. Lisa didn't hesitate. She shot a glance at Michael, who had already moved toward the door, his eyes locked on Alan one last time. He wasn't letting Alan get the upper hand. Alan cursed under his breath and reached into his jacket pocket as if to pull out something dangerous. But before he could react, Michael lunged at him, knocking his hand away. The fight was quick, fueled by the adrenaline of everything that had led up to this point. Alan was skilled, but Michael was determined, using every ounce of strength and focus he had to restrain the man before he could cause more harm. "Go!" Michael shouted at Lisa. "I've got him. Get Rachel out of here." Lisa didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran after Rachel, her feet pounding against the linoleum floor, each step pushing her closer to the chaos unfolding. As she rounded the corner, she spotted Rachel, crouching behind a row of cars, her eyes wide with panic. "Rachel!" Lisa called out, breathless. "We're getting out of here. Come on." Rachel glanced up, her eyes locking onto Lisa's with a mixture of relief and fear. She didn't hesitate for a second. Together, they ran to the car, hearts racing, minds frantic. As Lisa slammed the door shut, her hands shaking from the sheer intensity of the moment, she looked at Rachel and said, "We're getting out of here, and we're bringing the truth to the world." Rachel nodded, though her face was still pale. She had been through so much, but Lisa knew that the moment had come for them to stand together, no matter the cost. As Lisa started the engine, the reality of the situation hit her. They weren't just running, they were fighting back. They were taking control of their futures, and no one could stop them now. The road ahead was uncertain, and Lisa didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear, the truth was coming to light, and it wasn't going to be buried anymore. Lisa pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring to life as they sped away into the night. The journey they had started was far from over, but in that moment, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose that had been missing for so long. As they disappeared into the darkness, Lisa couldn't help but reflect on the path that had led her here. She had been fired, betrayed, and forced to face unimaginable obstacles. But through it all, she had discovered something stronger than fear, something worth fighting for. The truth. And in the end, it was the truth that would set them free. Hit subscribe and leave a comment about where you're looking. Lisa, Rachel and Michael are in full survival mode. What's next for them in this high-stakes race against time? Will they expose the truth or will they stay silent forever? Let us know your thoughts below in the comments. The cold night air hit Lisa's face as they sped down the highway, the distant city lights flickering in the rearview mirror like fading memories. Her heart still raced from the events of the past few hours, Michael's fight with Alan, Rachel's escape, the overwhelming sense of danger that had been hanging over them for weeks. It felt like they were running away, but they weren't. They were pushing forward, closer to the truth they had fought so hard to uncover. Rachel was sitting next to Lisa in the passenger seat, her face pale but determined. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a quiet tension between them. Rachel's hands were clenched in her lap, the nervous energy still crackling in the air, but she didn't speak. Lisa wanted to say something comforting, but the words stuck in her throat. "We'll get through this," Lisa finally said, her voice soft but resolute. "We're getting closer. Just a little longer, and we'll expose everything." Rachel nodded but didn't answer. Instead, she gazed out the window, her eyes distant, lost in thoughts Lisa couldn't access. It was as if Rachel was still processing everything that had happened, still trying to make sense of the chaos that had invaded her life. As they continued their drive, Michael's words echoed in Lisa's mind. "We can't stop now. We have the power to make a difference." His unshakable belief in their cause had been a constant anchor through everything, but now, Lisa wasn't so sure. Every step they took felt like it was bringing them closer to a precipice, one wrong move, and they might tumble into a void they couldn't recover from. But she also knew they couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. "Where are we going?" Rachel's voice broke through Lisa's thoughts. Lisa glanced over at her friend. "We're heading to the safe house. A friend of Michael's is waiting for us there. We can lay low for a while, regroup, and figure out our next move." Rachel's eyes flickered with concern. "And then what? What happens when we expose all of this? Will anyone even believe us?" The question hung in the air like a weight, and Lisa felt the gravity of it settle deep in her chest. She had asked herself the same thing. What if they had been chasing a ghost? What if the people who could actually make a difference were too corrupted to care? What if their fight was all in vain? I don't know, Lisa admitted quietly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. But we've come too far to stop now. We can't let them win. Rachel's face softened slightly, her gaze drifting to the dashboard as if contemplating Lisa's words. I don't know if I can go through with it. What if we're wrong? What if we're making things worse? Lisa understood the fear in her friend's voice. The stakes had escalated far beyond anything they could have imagined, and Rachel was carrying the weight of their entire plan on her shoulders. But Lisa had seen the fire in Rachel's eyes, the same fire that had driven her to stand up against the system, to speak out, even when the consequences were too great. You're not alone in this, Lisa said, her voice firm. I'm here. Michael's here. We're all in this together. The words seemed to offer Rachel some comfort, though the uncertainty was still there, lingering like a shadow over her. Lisa could see the internal struggle in her friend's face, the guilt, the doubt, the fear that they might be too small to make a real difference. The car hummed steadily down the highway, the night growing colder, darker. Lisa couldn't help but feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her. It wasn't just about Rachel's safety anymore, or even exposing the corruption. It was about their future. About fighting for the world they wanted to live in, one where people like Alan Hargrove didn't get to control the narrative. They drove on in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. Lisa glanced over at Rachel again, noticing the tight set of her jaw, the way her hands gripped the seat. It was clear she was struggling. Rachel, Lisa began carefully, I know it's hard. But you've got to remember why you started this fight in the first place. It wasn't just about bringing down people like Alan. It was about standing up for something bigger than ourselves. Rachel didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, she sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from the core of her being. I remember, she said quietly. But I'm scared. What if it's all too much? What if we're not strong enough? Lisa didn't have an immediate answer. She couldn't promise that everything would be okay. But she knew this much, Rachel had already shown incredible strength. Strength that had pushed them to this point. It was something they both needed to hold on to now. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the tension between them slowly began to ease. They were close now, just a few miles away from the safe house. But Lisa could sense something was still off, something looming in the back of her mind. Before she could put her thoughts into words, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Startled, she pulled it out, her heart pounding in anticipation. It was a message from Michael. They found us. Get to the safe house now. They're following you. Lisa's blood ran cold. She glanced at Rachel, who was already looking at her, eyes wide with fear. We need to go, now, Lisa said, her voice tight with urgency. The urgency in her voice spurred them into action. Lisa slammed the accelerator to the floor, the tires screeching as the car sped down the empty road. Her thoughts were a blur, everything was happening too fast, too out of control. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when they were so close. But as she pushed the car harder, the reality of the situation hit her. They had run for so long, fought so hard, but they couldn't outrun the danger forever. It was closing in on them, and they didn't know how much longer they could keep running. The flashing lights in the rearview mirror grew closer, a signal that they were being followed. Lisa's hands tightened on the wheel, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out. Rachel, she said, her voice hoarse with fear. Hold on tight. The car roared down the road, headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope, or a warning. The night wasn't over yet, and the fight was far from done. The roar of the engine was deafening as Lisa sped down the highway, the tires screeching as they fought to keep grip on the rain-slicked road. The flashing lights in the rearview mirror were growing closer, the unmistakable sound of sirens reaching a high-pitched shriek in the distance. Each moment felt like a lifetime, the air thick with tension. It wasn't just a chase anymore, it was a battle for survival. "Lisa, they're closing in." Rachel's voice trembled with panic. She was gripping the armrest with white-knuckled fists, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to do something. They'll catch us." Lisa's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror for a split second. The black SUVs tailing them were too close. They weren't going to make it to the safe house at this rate. "We need to lose them," Lisa muttered, her mind racing. There had to be a way. There had to be something she could do to get them out of this mess. The thought of Michael, of everything they had fought for, pushed Lisa to think faster, to act before it was too late. She couldn't lose now. She couldn't let Rachel down. The rain continued to pour down, blurring the world around them, but Lisa's focus was laser-sharp. They were on the outskirts of the city now, the streets narrowing, the buildings growing more sporadic. There was a chance, a small chance, that they could take a shortcut through the industrial area. If she could just turn onto that side road ahead, they might slip away from their pursuers. "Hold on!" Lisa shouted, her foot slamming harder on the gas pedal as she veered sharply to the right. The car swerved, tires squealing, and Lisa gripped the steering wheel with every ounce of strength. The rain was making everything slick, and the narrow road was just a few feet away. She barely made it, the car skidding onto the unlit street. The headlights of the SUVs behind them flickered as they tried to follow, but Lisa pushed the car harder, taking them deeper into the industrial district. The dark alleyways and abandoned warehouses loomed around them, their eerie silence offering a brief sense of security. Lisa slowed the car, her breathing heavy, her mind still racing. They couldn't stop. Not now. But maybe, just maybe, they could use the maze of alleys and abandoned buildings to shake off the pursuit. "We might lose them here," Lisa said, her voice tight with focus. She could hear Rachel's anxious breathing beside her, the tension in the air palpable. Rachel nodded, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "What now? What's the plan?" Lisa's fingers gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We keep moving. If we can't shake them in this area, we'll double back through the alleyways and make a break for the main highway. But we have to be quick." The sound of the sirens grew louder again, signaling that their pursuers hadn't given up. Lisa's heart was pounding in her chest as she sped through the maze of streets, the rain blurring her vision, the road ahead unclear. The next few moments felt like a blur of lights, sounds, and instinct. Suddenly, a figure dashed out from behind one of the warehouses, causing Lisa to slam on the brakes just in time. It was Michael, he had been waiting for them. "What the hell?" Rachel shouted, her voice a mix of shock and relief. "Michael! You found us." Michael jogged up to the car, looking harried but determined. His face was streaked with rain, his eyes wide with urgency. "They've tracked you down, but we don't have much time. You need to get to the other side of the city. There's a safe house there, a place to lay low. We can't stay here." Lisa's eyes flicked to Rachel, who was staring at Michael, still processing the shock of seeing him appear in the middle of their escape. "How did you?" Lisa started, but Michael cut her off. "It doesn't matter," he said quickly. "I'm in contact with someone who can help us, but we've got to move. There's no time for questions." Lisa hesitated for only a second before nodding. They couldn't afford to second-guess themselves now. She stepped on the gas again, pushing the car through the narrow alleyways, trying to remember the way Michael had directed them. As they reached the far end of the industrial district, Lisa felt her heart racing faster. The SUVs were still trailing them. There was no more time to waste. "We need to get off the main road now," Michael urged, his eyes scanning the streets ahead. "There's an abandoned gas station a few blocks up. We can use it to lose them." Lisa's stomach churned as she pushed the car through the rain-soaked streets, the pressure mounting with every turn. They had to make it, she couldn't let them down now. She could hear the pounding of her own heartbeat, the sound of their pursuers closing in, but she didn't slow down. Suddenly, a crackling sound came from Michael's radio. "Lisa," came the voice, strained and urgent. "It's happening. The media's getting wind of the story. The pressure's rising. You don't have much time." Lisa's grip tightened around the steering wheel as the weight of his words hit her. The media. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, was about to explode into the public eye. But with that explosion, came an even greater danger. She wasn't just running from those who wanted to silence them anymore. Now, they were fighting an even bigger battle, one that would put them in the public crosshairs. "We need to get to the safe house now," she said, her voice flat but determined. "I'll take care of everything from there. We expose it all, no turning back." But before Michael could answer, the sound of screeching tires interrupted the moment, followed by the harsh, bright glare of headlights illuminating the rearview mirror. "They're here," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lisa." Lisa pressed the pedal to the floor, swerving the car to the side as the lights from the SUVs flooded the rearview mirror. They couldn't outrun them forever. It was time to face the storm head-on. The engine roared louder than ever as Lisa pushed the car to its limits, tires screeching as they raced down the slick street, desperate to break away from the pursuit. The night had turned into a frantic blur of flashing lights, rain-soaked streets, and the unmistakable sense that every moment could be their last. But Lisa knew one thing for sure, they couldn't stop now. They couldn't let the truth slip away just because the danger was rising. "Lisa, they're right behind us." Rachel cried out, her voice trembling in panic. She was gripping the dashboard with both hands, her knuckles white. "We won't be able to shake them." "I know." Lisa shouted, her eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the dark road ahead. The SUVs were closing in, their headlights cutting through the downpour like a pair of predatory eyes, relentless and unforgiving. Lisa could almost feel the heat of their pursuit, the weight of the chase pressing down on her chest. She had to think, and think fast. The industrial area was behind them now, and they were nearing the edge of the city. Lisa's heart was racing. Time was running out. If they didn't do something soon, the entire plan would collapse. Michael's voice crackled over the radio again, urgent and commanding, "Lisa, listen to me. We need to get to the bridge. I've got people waiting on the other side who can help. You've got to get there now, no more detours." The bridge. Lisa's mind raced as she pushed the accelerator harder, barely glancing at Rachel, who was now staring out the window with a look of quiet determination. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. The bridge was their only chance. But it wasn't just the safe house they were heading toward now. It wasn't just about getting away from the people hunting them. The truth, the whole truth, was about to explode into the world, and once it did, there was no going back. Suddenly, a sharp sound split the night air. A gunshot. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as the car jolted violently to the side. She swerved instinctively, fighting to keep control of the wheel, but the car fishtailed dangerously. She could hear Rachel gasping beside her, and her stomach twisted with fear. They had just been shot at. Another shot rang out. The tires screeched again, but this time, the impact was worse. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest as the car slid across the road, struggling to regain control. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the visibility nearly zero. "Lisa!" Rachel shouted, her voice a raw edge of panic. "We can't keep this up. They're going to kill us." But Lisa wasn't listening. She was fighting to keep them alive, to stay on course, to get to the bridge. It was their only hope now, the only place where they could find safety, where they could finally fight back against everything they had uncovered. A sharp turn ahead. Lisa jerked the wheel, her heart in her throat as the tires squealed. The sound of the pursuing vehicles grew louder, and Lisa could feel the weight of their presence like a storm pressing in on her. They weren't going to let up. They weren't going to let them escape. "Hold on!" Lisa shouted, her voice filled with a mix of urgency and raw determination. "We're almost there." But as she pushed forward, something unexpected happened. The sound of another gunshot cracked through the night air, this time much closer. The car jolted again, and Lisa's vision blurred with the impact. She fought to regain control, but it was too late. The steering wheel jerked violently, and the car swerved off the road. The world spun as the tires hit the gravel shoulder, and in a sickening moment of realization, Lisa knew they were going to crash. She braced herself, her arms instinctively shielding Rachel, as the car slammed into a metal guardrail. The impact was bone-shaking, sending a violent jolt through Lisa's body. For a moment, everything went black. When Lisa regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the sharp pain in her head. Her temples throbbed, her body ached as though she'd been hit by a truck. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the disorienting fog that clouded her vision. Slowly, she realized she was still inside the car, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and gasoline. "Rachel," she gasped, her breath shallow as she struggled to move. Her hands trembled as she reached for the passenger seat, the seatbelt still holding her in place. She could barely make out the faint outline of Rachel in the dim light filtering through the cracked windshield. The car had come to a screeching halt, its front end pressed up against the metal guardrail. The engine was sputtering, and the air was thick with the smell of burning rubber and smoke. "Rachel!" Lisa shouted again, her voice panicked, trying to reach her friend. Rachel groaned, her head resting against the window. She was alive, but unconscious. Lisa's heart fluttered with a mixture of relief and terror. They had survived the crash, but now they were sitting ducks, trapped in the car with the pursuing vehicles closing in. She fumbled with the seatbelt, her fingers slick with sweat as she struggled to unbuckle herself. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let this be the end. Not like this. Not after everything they had fought for. Lisa reached over to Rachel, shaking her gently, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "Rachel, wake up. We have to go. They're going to find us." With a small moan, Rachel stirred, blinking rapidly as she came back to her senses. Her eyes focused on Lisa, and for a split second, everything felt normal again, like they were just two friends in a car, on a road trip. But reality came crashing down around them, and Lisa saw the panic begin to seep into Rachel's eyes. "We have to move," Lisa said, her voice steady but urgent. "Now. They'll be here any second." Rachel nodded, her face pale and wide-eyed. She could barely speak, but she understood. She reached for the door handle, but as she pulled it, the sound of another vehicle roaring toward them made them both freeze. "They're here," Lisa whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. With nowhere else to go, and the threat closing in, Lisa made a split-second decision. She grabbed Rachel's arm and yanked her out of the car, both of them stumbling into the rain-soaked night. They had no plan. No backup. Just a desperate need to survive. And as they ran, the only thing that kept Lisa going was the thought of the truth that was about to break free, no matter the cost. The rain lashed against their skin as Lisa and Rachel stumbled through the murky alleyways, their breath coming in sharp gasps. Their shoes splashed through the puddles, and the world around them felt as if it was closing in. The city streets seemed to stretch out endlessly in front of them, each corner more terrifying than the last. There was no safe place left to run, no hiding. It was just them now, with the truth and their pursuers nipping at their heels. "Where are we going?" Rachel gasped, her voice hoarse and frantic. She looked over at Lisa, her face pale and streaked with water, but her eyes burned with a mix of fear and determination. "We can't outrun them forever." Lisa's mind raced. She couldn't afford to panic. She had come so far, and she wasn't going to let everything they had worked for slip away. She had to get them to the safe house, the one Michael had mentioned earlier. It was their only chance. "I'm not sure," Lisa admitted, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But we have to keep moving. There's a place, a backup location. It's not far from here. We'll be okay." Rachel's face twisted with skepticism. "A backup?" "Lisa, they're coming. You heard the gunshots. The whole city's looking for us now. We're not going to just walk into some safe house without getting caught." "We don't have a choice," Lisa snapped, her frustration creeping in. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Look, I know it's bad right now. But we've got something they want. Something they can't ignore. And as long as we're alive, we can fight back." Rachel was silent for a moment, clearly absorbing Lisa's words. Then she nodded, her resolve solidifying. "All right. I'm with you. Let's just get there." They continued running through the darkness, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The rain showed no signs of letting up, drenching them to the bone as they dodged through alleyways and side streets. Lisa's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more urgent than the last. How long could they keep going like this? What if the safe house wasn't safe? And more than anything, what was going to happen when they finally exposed the truth? Would the world even be ready for it? The truth. The reason they were on the run, the reason they were being hunted down. It was bigger than they could have ever imagined, bigger than Michael had anticipated. And once it was out, there would be no going back. No hiding. The world would never be the same again. But the world didn't matter right now. All that mattered was surviving. Getting to the safe house. And getting Rachel to safety. After everything that had happened, that was the only thing Lisa could focus on. A distant, familiar sound broke through the quiet: engines. The unmistakable sound of the SUVs. They were coming. They found us. Rachel hissed, her voice trembling. "Lisa, we're out of time. Keep moving." Lisa yelled, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the adrenaline course through her veins, heightening her senses. Every sound seemed sharper, every movement faster. They had to keep ahead, keep running. If they could make it to the safe house, they could regroup and figure out their next move. But it wasn't going to be that easy. The sound of the engines was growing louder, and Lisa knew they were too close now. The pursuit was relentless. They were almost at the safe house, but the realization hit her like a freight train: they weren't going to make it in time. Without thinking, Lisa pulled Rachel into a nearby building, a dilapidated warehouse that seemed like it had been abandoned for years. The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, slipping inside just as the SUVs turned the corner. They had to be quick. The inside of the warehouse was dark and musty, but there was a faint light at the far end. Lisa and Rachel moved quietly, trying to avoid being seen. The only sound was their breathing, each breath coming in quick, shallow gasps as they huddled in the corner. The roar of the SUVs outside was a constant reminder of how close they were to being caught. "What now?" Rachel whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't just sit here and wait." Lisa's mind was working furiously, her thoughts bouncing between fear and determination. She had come this far. She had to make it count. There was one chance left, one shot at getting out of this alive and exposing the truth. The truth that could change everything. "We fight," Lisa said, her voice steady with the weight of her decision. "We can't outrun them anymore. We have to face this head-on." Rachel stared at her, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Face them? Lisa, they'll kill us." "No, they won't," Lisa said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "We have something they need, something they can't afford to lose. And we're not going down without a fight." We'll expose everything. The world will know what's happening. We won't let them bury the truth. As if on cue, the sound of footsteps grew louder, moving through the warehouse toward their hiding spot. The enemies were closing in. There was no turning back now. Lisa's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything she could use. She spotted a stack of crates near the far corner, perfect for cover. "We'll make a stand there," Lisa whispered urgently to Rachel. "Get ready." They moved quickly, taking cover behind the crates just as the footsteps stopped right outside the door. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she held her breath, waiting for the next move. She could hear the faint sound of a radio crackling, followed by voices. "They're in here somewhere," one of the voices said, sharp and authoritative. "Search the place. We can't let them get away." Lisa's grip tightened on a metal pipe she'd grabbed from the ground, her mind running through their options. They were outnumbered, but they weren't out of options. Not yet. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" Lisa's eyes locked with Rachel's, her expression hardening. "We make sure they don't leave with the truth. We fight until the world knows what they've done." The moment hung in the air like a thin thread. Lisa's heart was racing, her body tensed for what was coming next. The truth was almost within reach. But would they make it in time to expose it? The warehouse was dead silent, save for the distant hum of the rain outside. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched the metal pipe, the cool steel of the makeshift weapon grounding her. She exchanged a look with Rachel, who was pressed against the crates beside her, her eyes wide and filled with fear. They had come this far, but now they were cornered, their backs against the wall, with no way out. The sound of the footsteps drew nearer. The men outside the door weren't just here for a confrontation, they were here to end it. To end them. Lisa could feel it in her bones. Their pursuit had turned into a hunt, and they would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. "Lisa, we need to get out of here," Rachel whispered urgently, her voice shaking with panic. "They're coming closer. We're running out of time." But Lisa didn't respond immediately. Her mind was racing, calculating. Their options were limited, but they weren't completely helpless. The truth, they couldn't let it slip away now. Not after everything they'd gone through. This was their final stand, the moment that would define everything. If they didn't make it out alive, the truth would die with them. But if they did, the world would know. They could change everything. Lisa's grip on the pipe tightened as the door to the warehouse creaked open. "Find them," a voice shouted from outside. "They can't have gone far." Lisa's pulse quickened. She motioned for Rachel to stay quiet, pressing her finger to her lips. The men had spread out across the warehouse, searching in the shadows, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. They were getting closer. Rachel's breathing was shallow, her face pale as she hugged the crates tightly. Lisa's heart twisted. She knew this could be the end. But they couldn't stop now. They wouldn't go down without a fight. Suddenly, the sound of boots scraping across the concrete floor came too close for comfort. Lisa's mind snapped into action. She counted the steps, listening to the sound of the men moving across the room. There were 4 of them. Lisa's eyes darted around, searching for anything that could give them an edge. There had to be something. They weren't going down without a fight. They couldn't. "Rachel," Lisa whispered urgently, "we're going to move. When I say go, we run. You take the left. I'll take the right." Rachel nodded, her hands trembling. "But, we're outnumbered, Lisa. They've got guns." "I know," Lisa said, her voice steady with an underlying resolve. "But they don't have what we have." Her eyes flashed with the intensity of her belief. "The truth is on our side. They're the ones who should be afraid." Rachel swallowed hard but nodded again, her jaw clenched in determination. She trusted Lisa. And Lisa wasn't about to let her down. There was a break in the noise. A moment of stillness. Lisa knew this was their chance. She stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the men as they moved deeper into the warehouse, unaware of her position. She could see the shapes of the figures moving between the shadows, oblivious to the imminent danger. This was it. She couldn't hesitate now. Go! Lisa hissed, pushing herself into motion. Both of them sprinted toward opposite ends of the warehouse. The air seemed to thicken as Lisa ran, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. She heard footsteps behind her and the sound of Rachel's feet pounding against the concrete floor. They were splitting up, trying to outmaneuver the men in the shadows. Lisa's heart pounded in her ears, and for a brief second, she felt the terrifying sense that this was all happening too fast. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. Not now. She turned a corner sharply, her eyes searching for an opening, a way to gain the upper hand. And then she saw it. A stack of metal pipes. Heavy, industrial-grade tools stacked high against the wall. Without thinking, Lisa grabbed one, the weight of it reassuring her for the moment. She heard a man's voice shout from behind her, and she knew they were closing in. Lisa! Rachel's voice called out from across the room. The men were beginning to realize the trap they'd walked into. Lisa could hear the rustling, the shuffling of footsteps. It was now or never. She gripped the metal pipe and moved swiftly, running toward the group of men who had separated to search the room. As she approached the nearest figure, she swung with all her might, the pipe connecting with a thud. The man grunted, stumbling backward, knocked off balance by the force of her strike. He hit the ground with a loud crash, and Lisa didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, her pulse racing, adrenaline fueling her every movement. Rachel appeared from the other side, wielding a piece of scrap metal like a weapon. The two of them were a blur of movement, fighting, dodging, their eyes locked with determination as they worked in unison to take down the remaining three men. Lisa's heart thundered in her chest as she fought for their lives, for the truth. But then, the unthinkable happened. From the darkness, a voice called out, sharp and commanding. Stop! The voice was cold, filled with authority. Lisa froze mid-motion, the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. The man who had spoken stepped forward, his features emerging from the shadows. He was tall, imposing, and his cold eyes fixed on them like a predator. You've made a mistake, the man said, his tone calm but dangerous. You don't know what you're dealing with. It's over. Lisa's pulse skipped a beat. She recognized him immediately. He was the one who had been pulling the strings all along, the one behind the organization that had been hunting them. The man who had orchestrated everything, the one who had been controlling the game. Michael had warned her. But this isn't over, Lisa said, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her. The truth is coming out. You can't stop it. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. Oh, but I already have. Suddenly, the doors to the warehouse burst open, and more men rushed inside, guns drawn. Lisa's stomach dropped. The situation had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. And then, just as quickly as the storm had risen, a new figure emerged from the shadows. Michael. His eyes met Lisa's, filled with a fire that matched her own. Not so fast, he said, his voice filled with quiet fury. And in that moment, everything changed. The air in the warehouse seemed to freeze as Michael stepped into view, his figure cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him since the chaos had begun. There had been no time to think about his whereabouts or safety as she and Rachel had fought for their lives. But now, standing face to face with the man who had brought them into this web of lies and danger, everything felt surreal. The sound of the guns being cocked was deafening, echoing off the metal walls of the warehouse. Lisa felt her pulse race, her body tensing with the realization that they were outnumbered and outgunned. The men had her and Rachel cornered, with no way out. But Michael didn't flinch. He stood there, unwavering, his jaw set and his eyes locked onto the man in front of him, the one who had been pulling the strings behind this entire operation. "You think you've won?" Michael's voice was low and controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "This ends tonight. And not how you think." The man standing before them, a figure in a dark suit, his expression hard as steel, narrowed his eyes. "You have no idea what you're up against. You can't stop this. The world doesn't want your truth. It wants power. And you're just pawns in a game that's far bigger than you." Lisa's hands clenched into fists, her eyes flickering between Michael and the men holding guns. She wasn't sure what had brought him here, but right now, he was the only chance they had. She could see the resolve in his eyes, the fire that had burned in him ever since they met. Whatever it was he was about to do, Lisa knew one thing: it was the only chance they had to expose the truth and take down the men who had been manipulating them all. "Don't listen to him," Michael said, his gaze now fixed on Lisa. "You fought too hard to back down now." For the first time since this nightmare had started, Lisa felt a flicker of hope. Michael wasn't giving up. And neither could she. Rachel, who had been silent, took a deep breath and stepped forward, her expression hardening with resolve. "If we're going down fighting." The man in the dark suit smirked. "You're making a huge mistake. You don't know what you're up against." But Michael was already moving. In a flash, he lunged at the man with a speed and precision that surprised Lisa. The others hesitated for a split second, shocked by Michael's sudden attack. It was enough time for Lisa and Rachel to act. With the adrenaline coursing through her veins, Lisa didn't think twice. She grabbed a metal rod from the floor beside her and hurled it at the nearest man. The metal rod connected with his head, sending him crashing to the ground. His weapon skidded across the floor, and Lisa wasted no time. She grabbed it, aiming it at another attacker. "Stay down," she shouted, her voice sharp with authority. Rachel followed suit, charging at one of the remaining men with a fierce energy that shocked even Lisa. The two of them worked in perfect sync, taking down their pursuers one by one, using their environment to their advantage. The warehouse was their battleground, and they were no longer the prey. They were the ones taking control. Michael and the man in the dark suit were locked in a fierce struggle, but Lisa didn't have time to watch. She had to focus. In moments, the scene became chaotic, a flurry of movement, shouting, and the unmistakable sound of fists connecting with flesh. But in the midst of it all, something started to shift. The tide was turning. Lisa and Rachel had taken down their attackers, but the battle wasn't over yet. The man in the suit was still standing, though clearly injured from Michael's swift and brutal assault. But the situation was still precarious. They weren't out of danger yet. The man wiped blood from his lip, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than all of you." Lisa's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of his words, the truth that had been hidden for so long. But they weren't backing down. Not now. Michael stood tall, his breathing heavy but steady. He wiped the sweat from his brow and met the man's gaze with a fire that wasn't going out. "It's over. This ends here." The man's lips curled into a sinister smile, but Lisa saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? No, it was something deeper. Something he hadn't expected. The truth. The very thing they had been fighting to expose. It was inescapable now. "You think you've got the upper hand, but you have no idea what you're dealing with," the man sneered. "Do you think you can just walk away from this? You're all pawns in a game you don't even understand." Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady but resolute. "No, we're not pawns. We're the ones who will change this. We'll expose everything you've done. The world will know. The man took a step back, his expression faltering for a brief moment. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. "Then you'll never make it out alive," he said, his tone cold as ice. But Michael didn't flinch. "We're not afraid of you." With that, the man's smirk vanished. In a flash of movement, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a button of some kind. Before anyone could react, he pressed it, and the warehouse lights flickered wildly. A loud, mechanical sound echoed through the building, and suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake. "Get out!" Michael shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This place is rigged." Lisa's eyes widened as the ground trembled beneath her feet. The man had set the place to collapse, he was taking them down with him. But Michael's warning wasn't enough. The building was coming down around them. There was no time to think. They had to move, now. Lisa grabbed Rachel by the arm, and the two of them ran toward the exit, the ground shaking violently beneath their feet. Behind them, they could hear the crash of falling debris, the sound of their enemies' last moments as the warehouse began to collapse. And in that moment, as they ran for their lives, Lisa realized that everything had changed. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The sound of debris crashing to the ground echoed around them as Lisa and Rachel ran through the collapsing warehouse, adrenaline fueling every step. The walls groaned under the weight of the destruction, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Above, beams cracked and splintered, raining dust and rubble onto them as they sprinted for the only exit they could see, the metal door at the far end of the warehouse. Behind them, Michael was shouting at them to move faster, his voice lost in the roar of the building falling apart around them. The darkness was punctuated by flashing lights, as the emergency system struggled to keep up with the chaos. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts a blur as she focused solely on getting to safety. "Come on, Rachel!" Lisa shouted, pulling her friend forward. Rachel was close behind, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. They were running out of time, out of options. "Where's Michael?" Rachel gasped, her voice barely audible over the deafening noise of the collapsing structure. Lisa glanced over her shoulder. Michael was still fighting against the wreckage, trying to clear a path, but he was farther behind. They had to get out of here. He had to know that, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play, something Michael wasn't telling them. "Keep going," Lisa urged, pulling Rachel toward the exit. The heavy metal door was closer now, just a few more steps. They could make it. They had to. As they reached the door, Lisa slammed her shoulder against it, struggling to pull it open. The force of the collapse outside had jammed the door, and it resisted her every effort. Rachel was already behind her, kicking at the door in desperation. "Come on!" Rachel yelled. "We have to get out now." Lisa gritted her teeth, pushing harder against the door. She could feel the building shaking with increasing intensity, the walls buckling as if the entire structure was being sucked into a void. There was no time left. They needed to escape, or they wouldn't make it out alive. Then, just as Lisa was about to give up hope, there was a loud bang, and the door swung open. The force sent her tumbling forward, but she managed to catch herself on the asphalt just outside the warehouse. They were free. For a moment, Lisa couldn't breathe. The weight of what had just happened hit her all at once, the explosion, the building collapsing, the man in the suit, Michael's cryptic warning. It was all too much to process. She just needed to run, to put distance between them and that place. "Lisa!" Rachel's voice broke through her haze. "Where's Michael?" Lisa's heart lurched as she snapped her head around, searching the dimly lit area behind them. The rain was coming down harder now, the streets slick with water. The distant sounds of sirens could be heard, but there was no sign of Michael. She took a step forward, but Rachel grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "He's gone, isn't he?" Rachel said softly, her voice filled with sorrow. Lisa felt the sharp sting of guilt. She had never imagined this moment would come, that they would be separated in the final hour of the battle. She wanted to believe Michael was right behind them, that he had found a way to escape, but deep down, she knew the truth. The warehouse had collapsed. They were lucky to make it out alive. Michael might not have made it. Michael wouldn't leave us behind, Lisa said, more to herself than to Rachel. He has to be out there. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. But where? The whole building's coming down. There's no way he could. Lisa held up a hand, silencing Rachel. She heard something. It was faint at first, a distant sound over the storm. A car engine. The squeal of tires against wet pavement. Wait, Lisa said, her eyes scanning the darkened streets. Through the mist and rain, a black car appeared, speeding toward them. Lisa's heart jumped as it screeched to a stop in front of them. The windows rolled down, and there, behind the wheel, was Michael. His face was dirt-smeared, his clothes torn, but he was alive. Get in, Michael called out urgently, his eyes darting toward the wreckage. We don't have much time. Lisa and Rachel didn't need to be told twice. They both rushed to the car, jumping into the back seat as the engine roared to life again. Michael slammed the pedal to the floor, and the car sped away from the wreckage of the warehouse, the building still collapsing in the rearview mirror. Lisa took a deep breath, the tension finally beginning to ease from her shoulders. She couldn't believe it, somehow, they had made it out. But she knew their escape wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far bigger, far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. What happened in there? Rachel asked, her voice still shaky from the ordeal. What did you do? Michael kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched as he maneuvered the car through the rain-slicked streets. I made sure the truth didn't die with us, he said quietly. But it's not over. Not by a long shot. Lisa's heart dropped. She had known it. The danger wasn't behind them yet. In fact, they were about to enter the most dangerous part of their journey. They had exposed a fraction of the truth, but there was so much more to uncover. And the men they were up against wouldn't stop until the secrets were buried for good. What now? Rachel asked, looking between Lisa and Michael. Michael glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression hard. Now, we fight. Lisa's chest tightened at his words. She had a sinking feeling that whatever they were about to face, it was going to be worse than anything they had endured so far. But there was no turning back now. They were in this together, and they had one mission, to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Michael turned the wheel sharply, heading toward an uncertain future. They were on the run, hunted by the very people who had controlled the game from the shadows. But for the first time, Lisa felt the strength of their resolve. They were no longer running from their past, they were running toward a future that they would shape with their own hands. And no one, no matter how powerful, would be able to stop them. The rain pelted the car's windshield, blurring the world outside into a hazy mess of dark shapes and faint streetlights. Michael's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as though expecting someone, or something, to appear at any moment. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lisa sat in the back seat, her mind still racing from the madness of the warehouse, but now that they were out of immediate danger, new questions crept into her thoughts. What was Michael hiding? How had he really survived that collapse? And most importantly, what was their next move? Rachel, her eyes wide with disbelief, leaned forward. Michael, she said, her voice low but urgent, you have to tell us what's going on. You can't just leave us in the dark like this. What did you mean by, the truth didn't die with us? What did you do in there? Michael's jaw clenched, and for a moment, it looked as if he might keep silent. But then, he sighed, as if the weight of everything finally bore down on him. I made sure that evidence of what's been happening, the real story, got out, he said slowly, his voice taut with intensity. I knew they'd come after us, but I had to make sure they couldn't cover their tracks. I set up something big, before the warehouse came down. Lisa leaned forward, her heart pounding. Something big? What do you mean? Michael's gaze remained fixed on the road, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows over his face. The files. The recordings. Everything they've done, every deal, every shady transaction, it's all been documented. I uploaded everything I could before the place collapsed. It's out there now. In the right hands. Rachel's eyes widened. You think someone's going to get that information? That they'll actually use it to bring them down? I don't know, Michael admitted, his tone grim. But it's the only shot we've got. It's either they find it and expose the truth, or we're all dead. A chill ran through Lisa at his words. The truth. They had risked everything to get it out in the open, but now, as she looked at Michael, she realized just how high the stakes were. Their lives weren't the only ones on the line. The entire system they had been tangled up in, this web of lies, power, and corruption, was hanging by a thread. So what's our next move? Lisa asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. We get to a safe house. From there, we regroup, figure out who we can trust, and see if anyone's already moving on the information, Michael replied. But this is just the beginning. They won't stop. Not now. Not ever. Who are they exactly? Rachel asked, her voice filled with frustration. Who are we running from? Michael glanced at Rachel, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and sorrow. The people at the top. The ones who pulled all the strings, the ones who orchestrated everything. They've got power, money, and influence. They don't care about the law. They'll do anything to keep the truth buried. Lisa's stomach twisted at his words. They were up against powerful enemies, people who had the resources and ruthlessness to silence anyone who got in their way. But that didn't change what needed to be done. It only made the fight more dangerous. We can't keep running, Lisa said firmly, the resolve she had been trying to find finally settling in her bones. We need to take them down. We need to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Easy to say, Rachel muttered under her breath, though her voice held a touch of defiance. We don't even know who we can trust. You don't just go after people like this without backup. We need allies. Michael nodded, his expression hardening. I agree. That's why we're heading to a contact. Someone I know who can help us get the information out to the right people. From there, we make our next move. Lisa felt a surge of relief. If there was one thing they needed more than anything, it was allies. She wasn't sure who this contact was or how much help they could really offer, but it was a start. The hours seemed to stretch on as the car sped down the darkened highway. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the night was still thick with tension. Lisa's thoughts continued to race, but a part of her, the part that had fought so hard to make it out of the warehouse alive, kept her focused on one thing: survival. They had survived the collapse. They had survived the night. But would they survive the war that was coming? Michael, where exactly are we going? Lisa asked after a long silence, the weight of the question finally settling between them. Michael glanced at her briefly, his face unreadable. We're headed for a cabin. Remote. No one will think to look for us there. But we can't stay long. We need to move quickly. Sounds like we're in the wild now, Rachel joked, though there was no humor in her voice. Michael gave a brief smile. Pretty much. And we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. If they're watching us, and they are, we won't have much time before they catch up. Lisa's chest tightened as she imagined what could be waiting for them. Were they being tracked even now? Were the people behind the conspiracy closing in on them? She didn't know. She couldn't know. All she could do now was trust Michael, trust that he knew what he was doing. Are we ready for this? Lisa asked, her voice more to herself than to Michael or Rachel. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced out the windshield, his eyes narrowing slightly as he surveyed the road ahead. The uncertainty in his expression was almost imperceptible, but Lisa saw it. They were all in this together, and not even Michael had all the answers. They were heading into unknown territory, territory filled with enemies they couldn't even see. But there was one thing Lisa knew for sure, she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. She would fight until the very end. We're ready, Michael finally said, his voice firm. We have to be. As the car continued to speed down the highway, Lisa glanced at the dark road ahead. It seemed endless, and yet, in that moment, she realized they were no longer running away from the darkness. They were running toward the light. Toward the truth. And no matter what happened next, they would see it through. The car's headlights cut through the misty night as Michael navigated the winding road leading to the cabin. The further they drove, the more isolated the landscape became. The city lights, distant and faint, were soon swallowed by the thick trees and shadows that enveloped the road. There was something eerie about the desolation, the silence of it, broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the sound of the tires on wet pavement. Lisa sat in the back seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, still trying to process everything that had happened. The truth they had uncovered, the collapse of the warehouse, and now this, heading toward a remote cabin, trusting that it would be their safe haven. The air in the car felt heavy with tension, as if every mile they traveled was taking them further from the life they had known, into a world of uncertainty and danger. We're almost there, Michael said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Lisa nodded but didn't speak. She could feel the weight of the moment settling on her. The future was still unclear, but she was determined to fight, to find a way to make sure the truth didn't die in the shadows. But she had to admit, she didn't know if they had enough strength left to win this fight. The world they were up against was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The car took a sharp turn, and then, suddenly, the trees parted, revealing a small, weathered cabin. It sat alone at the edge of a clearing, tucked away from the world, hidden by the dense woods that surrounded it. The only sign of life was the faint light coming from the cabin's windows. "This is it," Michael said, slowing the car as he turned into the gravel driveway. Lisa exhaled, grateful to finally be somewhere relatively safe. At least, she hoped so. The car came to a stop in front of the cabin, and Michael killed the engine. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Michael got out of the car, followed by Rachel and Lisa. "Stay close," Michael said, his tone low and urgent. "We don't know if anyone's been tracking us. We'll go in, and I'll introduce you to the contact I told you about. Just, be careful." Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. She had known that the danger wasn't over, but the reality of it hit her all over again. There was something about this place that felt different, off, even. The cabin looked peaceful from the outside, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was a facade, hiding something beneath. As they approached the door, Michael knocked twice, quick, sharp raps that echoed in the quiet night. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his eyes were sharp, scanning them as though he were measuring their every move. "Michael," the man said, his voice deep and steady. "You made it. I was starting to think I'd be reading about your disappearance in the papers tomorrow." Michael stepped forward, a tight smile on his face. "I wouldn't count me out that easily, Jack. We need to talk. Things have gotten complicated." Jack raised an eyebrow but stepped aside to let them in. "Complicated? That's an understatement. But come in, come in. We have a lot to discuss." Inside, the cabin was modest but cozy. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. The walls were lined with shelves full of books, and there was a large wooden table in the center of the room, papers scattered across it. Lisa couldn't help but notice that the place was well stocked, almost as if someone had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Jack motioned for them to sit at the table. "Take a seat. I've been keeping an eye on things, and I've got some intel that might help us." Lisa and Rachel sat down, both of them looking at Michael for an explanation. Michael, however, seemed lost in thought as he studied Jack carefully. There was a history between them, something unspoken but palpable in the air. "Jack's well, let's just say he's a valuable ally," Michael explained, his voice carefully neutral. "He's been working behind the scenes, helping those who need it. But what we're dealing with now, it's bigger than either of us thought." Jack glanced at Michael, then turned to the table, picking up a folder that had been sitting open. He flipped through the papers, pausing briefly to study a few of them, before pushing them toward Lisa. "This is what you need to see," Jack said, his voice low. "This is everything we've managed to gather so far. The documents, the names, the connections, it's all right here." Lisa felt her heart skip a beat as she saw the files in front of her. There, in black and white, were details that were far too familiar, names of key figures involved in the conspiracy, companies, and even government connections. The magnitude of what they were up against was clearer than ever. These weren't just some rogue individuals. These were powerful players, people who had been pulling strings for years, if not decades. "Do you have any idea how deep this goes?" Jack asked, his eyes darkening. "These people have their hands in everything: politics, business, the media. They control the narrative. If we want to stop them, we'll need more than just the truth. We'll need to take their power away. We need to hit them where it hurts." Lisa's head spun. It was all so overwhelming. She thought about what they had already been through, the warehouse collapse, the threats, the lives lost, and now this. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, as she looked at Michael and Rachel, she knew there was no turning back. They had to keep going. "We'll do whatever it takes," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Rachel nodded in agreement. "We're in this together. No one's going to stop us." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying them for a moment. "Good. You'll need each other if you're going to survive what's coming next. The real battle's just beginning." Michael stood up and walked toward the window, his face shadowed in the dim light. "I know. And we're ready for it. We have to be." Lisa felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. The truth was out there, but they were far from safe. Their enemies were powerful, and they wouldn't stop until the truth was silenced. But as she sat there in the cabin, surrounded by allies, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, the chance to expose the lies, the corruption, and to make sure no one ever had to suffer in the dark again. As Michael turned to face them, his eyes filled with determination, Lisa knew they were all in this together, no matter what came next. The room was suffocating. Every breath felt heavier than the last, as the man standing in the doorway, Victor, continued to smirk, the coldness in his eyes growing with each passing second. The fire in the hearth crackled like a distant warning, but the silence in the cabin was deafening. Lisa's pulse raced in her throat, her mind reeling with the betrayal unfolding in front of her. Victor's dark eyes scanned the room, taking in Michael's tense stance, Jack's hand hovering near his gun, and Lisa and Rachel's stunned expressions. It was as if he was enjoying the power he held over them. This was his game, and they were all merely pieces moving at his command. Michael's fists were clenched, his body rigid with rage. "I trusted you," he spat, his voice barely above a growl. "You promised me you were on my side." Victor took a slow step forward, the door closing softly behind him, and his smile widened as he surveyed the tension in the room. "Trust is a luxury, Michael. A luxury you never had. You were always meant to be a tool, an instrument in a much larger plan. You never saw the bigger picture. Jack's eyes never left Victor, his voice steady but edged with a dangerous calm. You've been pulling strings from the beginning, haven't you? All of this, the warehouse, the information, it was never just about exposing the truth. It was about controlling the narrative, controlling everything. And we were too blind to see it. Victor's laugh was chilling. Exactly, Jack. You were so caught up in playing the hero that you couldn't see you were always following the script I wrote for you. You and Michael both. I gave you the information. I gave you the plan. But it was never about finding the truth. It was about making sure I was the one who held all the cards. And now, I do. Lisa's head was spinning, trying to connect the dots. She had trusted Jack, trusted Michael, even trusted the idea that they were on a mission to expose the truth. But now, everything was collapsing in on itself. She had been played just like everyone else, swept up in a game that none of them truly understood. Rachel, her face pale and eyes wide with disbelief, stepped forward. You're a monster. You've been using us all along, manipulating us into doing your bidding. Her voice was fierce, shaking with the weight of betrayal. Victor's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he regained his composure. I didn't use you, Rachel. I gave you a purpose. A cause. You could have had it all. Power. Control. But you, too, were too naive to see the truth. You thought you were heroes in a story where I was the villain. But in reality, you're just players in my game. And now, his gaze shifted to Michael, then back to the group. Now, you'll watch as I win. Michael's breathing was heavy, his jaw clenched tight. He had been used. All this time, all his effort, his hope, his fight, it had all been manipulated by Victor. The anger coursing through him felt like a fire, burning everything inside him. But he knew he couldn't act recklessly. They had to find a way out. What's the end game, Victor? Michael's voice was low but demanding. What do you want? Victor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with satisfaction. You still don't get it, do you? It's not about what I want. It's about what's always been inevitable. Power. Influence. You, Jack, Michael, none of you have the vision to see that the world is always controlled by the few at the top. The ones who know how to play the game. I've spent years setting this up. Years, and now, everything's falling into place. Lisa's stomach twisted with disgust. The idea that Victor had orchestrated all of this, the destruction of lives, the manipulation of their every move, the countless people who had been hurt in the process, it was overwhelming. But she wasn't going to back down. Not now. We'll stop you, she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. You can't win. We won't let you. Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. You think you can stop me? You think you have the power to change anything now? It's too late. The wheels are already in motion. You've lost. Michael took a deep breath, shaking his head, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. No. It's never too late. We may have been playing your game, but we still have one card left to play. Jack glanced at Michael, then at Lisa and Rachel, a silent understanding passing between them. They may have been betrayed, but the game wasn't over yet. If Victor thought they were defeated, he had another thing coming. They had one chance left, one chance to take back control. Victor laughed, the sound grating against Lisa's nerves. You're out of options. The truth is buried, and the world will never know what really happened. You'll be silenced, just like everyone else. For a moment, Lisa thought she might give in to the weight of Victor's words. It seemed like they were trapped in a maze, every path leading back to him, every step drawing them deeper into his web. But then, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. You're wrong, she said firmly, her gaze locked on Victor. You underestimate us. You thought we were pawns in your game, but you didn't account for the one thing that's always been stronger than your lies, our will to fight. The truth doesn't belong to you, Victor. It belongs to the people. And we'll make sure they know it. Victor's face twisted in a mix of amusement and contempt. You really think you can change anything now? You're all so naive. But there was something in Lisa's voice, something in the way she stood tall despite the looming darkness, that made Victor falter. For just a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. And that, more than anything, was the first crack in his seemingly impenetrable armor. Michael stepped forward, his voice calm but full of resolve. We've been playing your game, Victor. But it's over now. You've made a mistake. You underestimated us. Victor's smile faltered again. You think you've won? Lisa's heart raced as she took a step closer to Michael, her hand reaching for his. We haven't won yet, she said softly. But we will. Jack gave a small nod of approval, his eyes hardening with determination. They weren't done. Not yet. They still had one shot at exposing the truth, and they were going to take it. Victor's expression darkened as he realized that his grip on them was slipping. He knew the game wasn't over, but he didn't yet understand that it wasn't just about power. It was about justice. And they were going to make sure he was the one who lost. The final battle was coming. The cabin felt smaller now, suffocating even. Every shadow seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Victor stood at the center of the room, his confidence unshaken, though a glimmer of doubt still lingered in his eyes. He had been playing a long game, but it was clear now that the tables were turning. The unyielding grip of control he had over them was slipping. Michael, Lisa, Jack, and Rachel stood together, an unspoken bond between them. It was a bond forged through deception, betrayal, and a fight for something greater than any one of them. They had been dragged through hell and back, but the fire of justice burned stronger than ever. The truth, however painful, was within reach, and they weren't going to stop until they exposed it to the world. Victor sneered, crossing his arms. You're wasting your time. Do you really think you can stop me now? You're out of options, out of time. Lisa's heart pounded as she stepped forward, her voice steady and defiant. You're wrong, Victor. We've already won. You just don't know it yet. Rachel, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and determination, stepped beside Lisa. You can manipulate people, use them, but you can't control the truth. That's something you'll never understand. Jack didn't say a word but positioned himself closer to the door, ready to act if needed. His eyes never left Victor, watching his every move. It wasn't just about taking down Victor anymore, it was about ensuring they all made it out of this alive and free. Victor's expression darkened as he looked at them, his jaw clenched tightly. He knew that his time was running out, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. You really think you've beaten me? You think you have the power to expose me, to ruin everything I've worked for? He laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I've already won, and nothing you do will change that. But Lisa, despite the fear gnawing at her insides, stood tall. We've been playing your game, Victor. But now, it's over. You've underestimated us. We may not have had all the answers at first, but we've learned. And what we've learned is that you're not as invincible as you think. Victor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a cold, knowing smile. You think you can expose me? Do you really believe that anyone will believe you? The system is already in place. You're just ants under my boot. Michael stepped forward, his voice unwavering. You're wrong. You've been manipulating us, pulling the strings, but we've had enough. The people who are in charge of this, your network, your connections, they can't protect you forever. We're going to make sure they know the truth. Victor's gaze flickered for a moment, the confidence in his stance momentarily cracking. He had underestimated their resolve. He had thought they were weak, disjointed, broken. But now, they were united. Now, they had the power. You think you can just tell the world and they'll listen? Victor spat, his eyes cold. You're no different from everyone else. You'll be silenced. This is bigger than any of you. A long pause followed his words. It felt like the world itself had stopped, holding its breath. Michael, Lisa, Jack, and Rachel exchanged silent glances. They knew what was coming next, there was no turning back now. Lisa walked toward Victor, her voice calm yet firm. You're right about one thing, Victor. This is bigger than us. But what you fail to realize is that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to bury it. Victor's lips curled into a mocking smile, but there was a trace of doubt behind his eyes. And what exactly do you plan to do? Expose me? What proof do you have? Proof? Jack's voice rang out, sharp and final. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a stack of papers, evidence they had uncovered over the past few days, documents, records, and testimonies that exposed Victor's vast web of manipulation. We have everything we need. Every lie you've told, every person you've destroyed. It's all here. And it's going to the press. Victor's face twisted in disbelief as he took a step back. You think anyone will care? You think they'll believe you over me? Rachel's voice, soft yet unwavering, cut through the tension. The truth isn't about what people believe, Victor. It's about what's real. And what's real is that you've been running this game for too long. It's over. Michael placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder, steadying her as the storm of emotions inside her threatened to overwhelm her. It's done, Victor. This is the moment you're going to lose. You can't stop what's coming next. For a moment, everything was still. And then, with a sudden burst of rage, Victor lunged forward, his hand reaching for something hidden in his jacket. But Jack was quicker. He had already anticipated the move, and within seconds, he had Victor pinned to the wall, the gun in his hand aimed firmly at his chest. You'll get nothing, Victor, Jack growled. Your game ends here. And you won't get another chance to destroy anyone else. Victor sneered, but there was no arrogance left in his eyes. He knew his time had run out. You think you've won? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. This is just the beginning. Someone will come for you. Someone always does. Michael's face hardened. Not this time. You've taken everything from people who trusted you. But now, it's our turn. Lisa stepped forward, the weight of the moment finally hitting her. The finality of it all. It wasn't just about taking down a powerful man. It was about taking back control. Taking back their lives. And giving the world a chance to know the truth. She turned to Jack, her voice soft but filled with conviction. It's over. We've won. Victor's expression faltered, his body going slack under Jack's hold. He had lost. And there was nothing more he could do. The room was filled with a tense silence as Jack kept the gun trained on Victor, making sure he couldn't escape. Lisa stood next to Michael, both of them watching as the last of the darkness began to recede. Victor's face twisted in defeat, but his voice remained cold. This isn't the end. You'll see. It never ends. But Michael's words were final, it's over. And with that, the battle was won. The weight of what they had just accomplished was sinking in, but it was not a burden. No, this was the weight of relief, of finally knowing that justice would be served. The storm inside the cabin had passed, but it was only the beginning of the calm that followed. The papers, the evidence, all of it, had been handed over to the right people. The wheels of justice were already set in motion. Victor, defeated and broken, had been taken away. The truth was out, and his empire was crumbling, piece by piece. But as Michael, Lisa, Jack, and Rachel stood in the aftermath, they couldn't help but feel a bittersweet emptiness. They had fought so hard to expose the lies, to destroy the monster that had been pulling the strings, and yet, they couldn't help but wonder, what now? The room had quieted, the once tense air now replaced with the hum of anticipation. Outside the cabin, the world was still turning, unaware of the battle that had just been fought behind closed doors. But it was coming. Soon, the world would know what Victor had done, and everything would change. Lisa sat down on the edge of the small wooden table, her mind racing as she stared at the papers strewn across it. The press had already been notified, and soon, the truth would spread like wildfire. The news would break, the investigation would begin, and the people who had been in Victor's grip would finally be free. But what did that mean for them? What came next? "I can't believe it's finally over," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was still shaking, though her tears had dried long ago. She had been through so much, the fear, the doubt, the betrayal, but now, standing here, she felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. Jack, always the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence. "It's over for now, but the real work begins. Exposing Victor was just the start. Now we need to make sure the system doesn't cover this up. There are too many people who would want to sweep this under the rug." Michael nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen. We've come this far. There's no turning back." Lisa looked at him, her heart heavy but full of admiration. She had never imagined she would be standing here, at the end of this journey. She had been dragged into this world of secrets and lies unwillingly, but she had found something she hadn't expected: strength. She had found a purpose, a reason to fight for something greater than herself. "We've lost so much," Lisa said softly, her voice cracking. "People we loved, people we trusted. All because of Victor's game. How do we even begin to move on from that?" Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a rare moment of comfort. "We move on by knowing that we did the right thing. We may have lost people along the way, but we're still standing. And that means something." Jack added, "And we're not alone in this. We've got each other. That's more than most people can say." Lisa smiled at Jack's words, the weight of them grounding her. She hadn't been alone in this fight. They hadn't been alone. There had been moments of fear, of doubt, but in the end, they had done it together. They had all changed. They were no longer the people they had been when they first walked into this battle. They had fought for what was right, for the truth. They had become more than survivors, they had become warriors for justice. "Do you think Victor was ever capable of feeling remorse?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you think, deep down, he ever realized the damage he did?" "No," Michael said, shaking his head. "People like him don't have the capacity for that. He believed he was invincible, that the world was his to control. He never saw us coming." Lisa paused, her thoughts turning inward. "I wonder if, deep down, he ever knew how much he hurt people. I wonder if, for a second, he felt guilty." "It doesn't matter," Jack said, his voice hard. "What matters is that he's done. The people he hurt are finally going to get the chance to heal. And we're not going to stop until the truth reaches every corner of the world." Rachel looked out the window, her expression distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the cabin, beyond the battle they had just fought. "The truth changes everything," she said softly. "It's scary, but it's the only way forward. Without it, we're all just walking in the dark." For a long time, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that followed a storm, a moment of peace, of reflection. They had come through the fire. But now, it was time for the ashes to settle, and for them to rebuild from the ground up. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing broke the quiet. Lisa picked it up, her heart racing for a moment before she answered. "Lisa." It was James, the journalist who had helped them get the truth into the public eye. "It's happening. The story's going viral. The networks are picking it up. The people who were involved in Victor's schemes are coming forward. It's all breaking. You've done it. You've brought him down. Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. It was happening. The truth was out, and the world was waking up to what had been hidden for so long. We did it, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We really did it. We couldn't have done it without you, James replied, his voice full of gratitude. You're a hero, Lisa. All of you are. As she hung up the phone, Lisa looked at the others, her heart swelling with pride and relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she could see the light breaking through the darkness. They had fought for the truth, and in the end, it had been worth it. We're going to be okay, Lisa said, her voice full of conviction. We're going to rebuild, and we're going to help the people who need it most. This is just the beginning. And so, they stepped out of the cabin, the weight of their victory heavy but hopeful. The world would know the truth. They had exposed the lies, and now, it was time to rebuild, one step at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?